What's up, everybody? We're talking injuries today on Too Much Best Ball, and I had to bring in an expert, and I bet you can't guess who it is. Yo, what's up, everybody? We are back with another episode of Too Much Best Ball. Today we have a special guest who's not only a physical therapist, but also the lead writer, head injury analyst, and DFS expert for the fantasy footballers. He's the go-to guy when it comes to understanding player injuries and how they impact your fantasy team. Please join me in welcoming the man who not only can diagnose your ACL, but also your DFS lineups, Matthew Betz.
So true, man. So true. It's funny, in today's space, a lot of people learn who I am through the footballers or kind of through the DFS takes, but they're like, oh, like you're like an actual PT. I'm like, yeah, man. Like we get to do both here. So it's fun to kind of, wear both hats, so to speak, and give some advice on both. And I think today's show is gonna be really helpful to kind of combine the two when you're talking about best ball, but also like what do we do with all these players coming off injury?
100%. We see all these things popping up, whether it be on Twitter, different websites, all these things, and sometimes it's conflicting. You see a positive spin from this player's injury, and then you see the reverse action on the injury. And I've been burned plenty of times, so I'm afraid when it comes to the injured players or the early injured players. But there's definitely value to be had. So I'm excited to get your take on that. Before we dive into it too much, for the few people watching that might not know who you are, we got to let them dive in a little bit, find out a little bit more about Matthew Betz. So starting off, I believe it's been a topic on one of y'all's shows before, but toilet paper, are you an over or an under guy?
So I saw this in the show doc, and I thought to myself, I was like, genuinely, if I had to guess right now what is the situation in the bathroom, I wouldn't be able to tell you. Like truthfully, I was like, I don't even know. So I walked in quickly before we started, took a look. It actually goes over. I cannot tell you if that is a habit from anyone in our household or if it just happened that day. But today, it is over.
Nice. So you guys could be just 50-50 every time, huh?
We honestly could be. And it might change bathroom to bathroom.
Yeah, once the little ones start finding it, that might be what finally changes it for you. Because we're definitely an under at my house. I've got 2 cats, and they know how to spin that bad boy and empty it out. So we had to learn quick. Next one for me. This one, I can't figure out where I personally sit on it. So when you're in an airplane, are you allowed to recline backwards?
I mean, I always do. I'm pretty tall, about 6'1". So, airplanes are not the most comfortable situation for a lot of people. So I almost always do, but they only go back 3 or 4 inches. It's not like they're back super far. If it's ever an issue, I just turn around. I'm like, hey man, turn around behind me. Do you mind? And almost, I would say 99% of the time, and I don't fly a ton, but when I have, they've been like, yeah, it's fine. Go ahead. And I feel like as long as you're polite about it, I mean, there's no real issue.
I mean, who wants to be polite though? You're not going to make it on a viral video if you're polite on an airplane. Come on.
Truth. Truth.
Yeah, I'm a taller guy too, so I definitely don't like it when the person in front of me reclines, but I still recline myself. So it's one of those hard ones. It's feel a little hypocritical. The way I beat it though, I go for the second exit row because that means the first exit row they can't recline because you can't block an exit row. So I usually just end up for that second exit row and I don't have to worry about it all, and I'm not stuck in that position. But I love the confidence. Yeah, exactly. When you're 6'5", you got to figure out the best seat.
Yeah, seriously, man.
It's no fun, and they won't give me a discount. I'm like, come on, give me the bigger seat. No.
Not a chance.
Not a chance. So last one I've got here for you is fantasy football. We hear you talking a lot of best ball, a lot of DFS, dynasty, of course. What is your favorite format? Do you have one, or you just love for all of them?
Yeah, I mean, I was just like a lot of people when they first started playing. It was like my high school buddies, my college buddies, your typical 12-man redraft league, the stalest settings you can imagine, nothing fancy. Just that's how I got into it. And then I found Dynasty, loved it. And then, over the years, I had played a little bit of DraftKings here and there, but it was Sunday morning, 11, oh, that guy looks good. That game looks good. Sure, let's just see what happens. And of course, I didn't win anything. But as I took it more seriously, I truly developed a love for not just the game theory side of DFS, because it's such a different game than a weekly start sit decision, obviously. And that really kind of became a passion. But then best ball became this huge, boom in the last, I would say, 3 years. And there's still people that are joining it, and there's so much more content around it, which is awesome for, the, upside of the game over the next 3, 4, 5 years. Like, it's going to be the new, not normal because everyone's still doing redraft leagues, but like it's more normal than it was a few years ago. And so I have found a love for like the combination of your redraft focused, player takes and, team level analysis and all that sort of stuff. But you also have to remember, like, you're playing a different game than just a regular redraft league. There's a game theory aspect to it, which combines some of the DFS concepts. So I love best ball. I think it's my favorite right now, just because to me, the best part of fantasy football is drafting. You're doing that, all summer. And it combines, like I said, those two loves of redraft leagues plus the DFS concept side of things.
Yeah, it's hard not to choose best ball. I feel like redraft is my true love. It's the first one I ever played. Dynasty's hard for me just because 90% of the players that we're researching prior to the NFL draft do nothing. And that hurts me.
Right.
Like all that time on those players just wasted. Those names, those stats stuck in your head forever when I can't even remember to take out the trash, what night trash night is. So Dynasty, it hurts me there. But best ball, man, like you said, best part is drafting. So like, how can you not just love this part of the season?
For sure.
All right, so diving into it, you guys have the DFS show over there with you and Kyle on the Footballers DFS show. Great show, by the way. Love the UDK plus, the DFS optimizer you guys have. It's saved me last season, that's for sure.
Awesome, man. Happy to hear that.
But when you're checking out your rosters and construction, trying to maximize the risk while also playing with the injury, where do you find yourself in that? Is ADP one of your big decision makers with that, or how do you go about balancing that risk management?
Yeah, I mean it's a little bit different in best ball formats compared to like a standard redraft league where the week 1, week 2, week 3 matchups where you're trying to figure out start sit decisions, really does come with this whole other kind of aspect of things. But in best ball, especially if you're playing like tournament styles, whether it's an underdog for Best Ball Mania, they've got 10 different tournaments right now. The Puppy, they've got a Superflex contest. If you're on DraftKings and the Million Maker, like whatever, like those sort of contests, you're playing for a top 0.001% outcome anyway. And so sometimes in that format, I'm willing to say like, with a certain player's injury, like I know it's not super likely that this is going to come to fruition and be like the guy you need in week 17 when we're trying to predict what's going to happen in 6 months. But in that format, like, most of your teams aren't going to win anyway, truthfully, right? And people that have played enough best ball know that. Like, your chances of actually taking home a serious amount of money is pretty thin. And that's kind of the fun aspect to chase that, but also the realization. And so certain players' injuries, like I'm more likely to embrace the risk in best ball than I am in redraft leagues. But like you said, a lot of it, what it comes down to is ADP. Earlier in this offseason, if you are one of the absolute sick individuals that drafts in the big board on Underdog, which happens, like it was opened, like I think before the Super Bowl even was played, like if I'm not mistaken.
That's sad if it was.
It was open to draft. And I'm not ashamed to say I might have drafted a team or two. But, there's different contests that happen different times of the year. In that contest, Nick Chubb was going like 87th overall, something like that, in February, March. And it's like, what are we even doing here? And now as the time goes on and as people learn more information about his injury and the serious nature of it and all those sort of things, he's fallen to the 120s and now the 130s, and he will continue to just fall and fall and fall. And, I've been on record, whether you're in the Ultimate Draft Kit or on other shows I've done, like I don't think Nick Chubb is ever going to be Nick Chubb again, unfortunately, at this stage of his career. But that doesn't mean that he can't provide like 1 or 2 good games in the fantasy playoffs. And so I have taken 0 of Nick Chubb so far. But like you said, ADP matters. So like if he gets to the 16th round and the 15th round, it's like maybe I'll dip my toes in and hope I run into a week or 2 here or there where it matters most. But, like you said, ADP matters so much. If he was still going in the 80s, not a chance. Same thing with TJ Hawkinson. He was going for a while in the top 100 overall in the big board and the little board. When Best Ball Mania opened, it was like, this is just so early for a player who probably won't be 100% until maybe November, maybe December. What he has to do at this current ADP where he goes is obviously a lot less than what he would have had to do, at his previous ADP. So cost is such a huge factor in it that it makes it a fun, nuanced conversation, because a lot of people just want the answer like, yes, like, do I take him? Yes or no? Black or white? Is this a good pick or a bad pick? But oftentimes it's all about the ADP and the risk associated with it.
Yeah, it's one of those hard things to answer. Like you said, it's definitely not black and white. I'm definitely guilty of taking a handful of teams in the big board, before the draft. I thought Michael Mayer was the absolute safest tight end to take, and I'm sad to say he was one of my highest exposure tight ends. And look where we're at now, folks.
I mean, what a weird pick, the Brock Bowers pick. Like, I think Brock Bowers is an awesome prospect. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think anybody saw the Raiders taking him, so it was just a complete curveball.
Yeah, I ran downstairs after the Jets picked at 11. I was like, oh my God. I was telling my wife, I was like, the Colts are we're getting Brock Bowers. Oh my gosh, we're going to get Brock Bowers. And then the Raiders just did that to me. And my night wasn't great after that.
Fair enough.
Heartbroken. Heartbroken. How do you identify players in the later rounds that have that potential to become later league winners, especially those that might be overlooked because of injuries? Obviously, you kind of touched on Nick Chubb, very last pick of the draft, if anything. But we see, oh my gosh, drawing the blank, Keaton Mitchell for Baltimore going way late in drafts. Is he one of those players that is kind of like flirting with possibilities of grabbing?
So Keaton Mitchell's tough, right? Like, talking about his situation specifically, his ACL tear happened in December, so he's a very late season type of injury where, not only is it like, okay, he has to come back, but also he has to come back and carve out a role. When does that happen? Like, when is he functional enough in the offense? When is he healthy enough, explosive enough to contribute? And when he does contribute, he's probably like at best 10 touch per game kind of guy, even in like the best case scenario. Like, he's never going to be the 20 touch type of running back just because of his size profile. And then you look at what they have on the roster. Of course, they've got Derrick Henry, who they paid. Obviously, Lamar Jackson's going to run the football. Justice Hill will have his special teams role, but also his pass down role. So like, when I think about all those factors, it's like so much, not even just from an injury perspective, but like so much has to go right for him to be meaningful for you in best ball that I haven't taken him at all. And now you have the injury on top of it. It just makes the bet more thin. The other thing too, for guys like that, and a lot of my studies have shown that running backs coming off of the ACL injury, usually there's predictors of success. It's high draft capital. So guys that go in round 1, round 2, they're highly athletic when you look at their pre-NFL draft testing, when you look at the combine numbers or their pro day numbers, wherever they have those available. And it's also the age. So younger guys with high draft capital who are super explosive, Breece Hall, do very well off the ACL in year 1. Keaton Mitchell, unfortunately, is an undrafted free agent. Now they have no financial commitment to him at all with the Derrick Henry situation. So I suppose it's possible he has a couple spike weeks in the right scenario. But like I said, it's a pretty thin bet. And so even for me, I haven't taken him at all this year.
Yeah, I've looked at it before. Some of my correlation, does it make sense to grab him here and there? And it's just like, all right, you're kind of banking on him showing up just for the fantasy playoffs, if anything. And
Right.
it's a hard bet to take. There's always a debate on injury-prone players. We saw Christian McCaffrey be a dud for 2 seasons straight, and I was that guy that third year. I'm like, well, I don't want to be the guy that does it again. Kind of like David Johnson, years prior to that. How do you find yourself identifying whether it's just bad luck or it is injury-prone? Like Joe Burrow, he's been out 2 of 4 years. Lamar, we kind of see him coming in and out. So I struggle, I guess, trying to identify that and keep the feelings out of those conversations.
Yeah, you're not alone. I mean, this is something that probably the most commonly asked question I get is is injury prone a real thing? How do you account for it in drafts? And when do you know when to take that guy off your board or actually embrace the risk? And, for me, really what it comes down to is understanding injury patterns and injury history. So when you think about, for a while, if there's any new listeners, maybe they weren't playing fantasy, 6, 7, 8 years ago. But at the time when Keenan Allen had his issues early on, it was he had the PCL injury coming out of college. He had a clavicle injury. He lacerated his kidney. He had the ACL injury somewhere in that mix. My memory's a little spotty, but somewhere in that mix. And it's the pattern here doesn't really make sense. We're docking a guy because he lacerated his kidney playing professional football. It's not fair. Right? It doesn't make sense. But someone Will Fuller, where it's been the same issue year after year after year after year, it's always the hamstring over and over and over again. There's a difference in those players' patterns where the number one predictor of future injury across the research is the same injury in your injury history. So a player who has had a hamstring injury in the past, they're more likely to have one again in the next season. Someone who has had an ACL tear, they're more likely to have another one. Those just are kind of the facts. But like someone who has a history of ankle sprains that then picks up a shoulder injury, there's no real correlation there. That's sort of just a fluky thing. So I make sure that I'm like taking a step back and looking at the player's profile in totality before trying to decide like where's the risk here and is it worth going in. So that's kind of how I approach it for the most part. But like you said, with those players too, the Christian McCaffrey thing is so interesting because when he was labeled as that injury prone type of guy, it was like a couple of years of I don't want to say bad luck, but just really hurt. Like where you took him at the 101 or 102 in your draft. Like you spent the pick on him to get him and he burned you. But if you just said this guy's injury prone, I'm done, you missed out on just legendary seasons from him, obviously. And one thing that led to him having, I think, a better, surge in his health, so to speak, is there was a lot of public information. Like this dude is changing his diet. He's changing his routine. He is changing XYZ. He's trying to fix this stuff. And everyone was like, yeah, doesn't matter. Like I'm out. And it's like, well, we need to leave the light on for those guys that like are trying to, turn the corner and adjust things. Christian Watson is the perfect example this year, right? It's like last year was such a brutal season. Had the hamstring injury, and I already mentioned guys that have a hamstring injury, they have a higher risk of it in the future, but the in-season recurrence rate is massive, and you saw that last year. And basically, it was a lost season. So he's a guy that if we had no news this entire offseason, it's just like, he's back, let's see what happens and hope. I'd be pretty low on Christian Watson, but he spent a ton of time. The Packers spent a ton of resources to try to figure this thing out. Sounds like they have. And yet the market is still like, nah, we're good, right? Like on Underdog, where it's so wide receiver heavy, every wide receiver is pushed up. I mean, Keon Coleman's profile coming out of college was kind of terrible. And he's like the 70th overall pick or something ridiculous. So like all these players are just pushed up the board if you're a wide receiver because of how people are drafting. Yet Christian Watson just kind of floats around like pick 85-ish. And it's like, man, in best ball, where all we care about is upside and the market isn't really adjusting for this new information, it's like, yeah, I'll take him. I'm not hammering him every single time, but like he's in my Jordan Love stacks, and you kind of hope for the best, so to speak. But that's my long-winded way of saying I think a player's profile and totality matters. You got to understand what they're doing in the offseason, and that all kind of comes together to form an opinionated take.
So what I'm really taking away from that too is we need to get Andrew Luck on the phone, because clearly he's not injury prone. He just had some bad luck, and now we need to bring him back out there. We're good to go now, buddy.
Oh my goodness, that was! I still remember like hearing live like Andrew Luck is retired. It's like, what? That was one of the craziest NFL memories for me in the last 10 years.
Yeah, my weirdly enough, my little brother was over at my house. My wife had just started recording us in the living room because we were watching, the game was up on, and she has our live reaction of him retiring, and it's sad because she plays it every single year to rub it in our face. But yeah, it's brutal. It was hard for me. Yeah, it's okay. I'm getting over it. 10 more years, I think I'll finally be past that. Last best ball question, I wanted to dig into your head a little bit about stacking. Do you have a favorite stack that you're leaning toward this year? A lot of that obviously depends on where you're picking in the draft, but are there some that are really ringing to you that you try to see if you can force in there, whether it be in the smaller tournaments that are ending quicker, or the big best ball mania drafts?
Yeah, one strategy that I'm trying to employ a little bit more this year than I have in the past is trying to target some of these top tier tight end options, because their prices are so much cheaper than they were in previous seasons. Like Travis Kelce last year was a first-round pick, right? 2 years ago, first-round pick. Mark Andrews consistently used to go at the 2-3 turn. Now all of those guys are 2+ rounds cheaper. So you're talking about, Sam Laporta's ADP has dropped a little bit. He's still so expensive that I haven't taken a ton of him. It's not that I don't like him. It's just, I'm making a bet on basically tight end 2 through 7 to either match him or beat him kind of thing from a game theory standpoint. But the take home is like these elite tight ends that are going in round 4, round 5, sometimes round 6. It's pretty wild that you can get that now when you never used to be able to do that. And so for me, I just keep coming back to Lamar and Mark Andrews as one of my favorite stacks that you can get. Lamar in round 4, Mark Andrews sometimes early round 5. Andrews last year, before the injury, was averaging 12.5 half PPR points per game, which is Underdog's format. That would have finished as the tight end 1 across the season. And yet, because he had that, pretty gruesome high ankle sprain with the fractured fibula, we're kind of like, it's the same thing. We're like fatigue. We're like, we've seen this before. He gets injured all the time. Like I'm out. I'm trying to take him a ton, and I'm more of a player takes drafter than I think a lot of other people that draft that do like a lot of portfolios. But I would like to purposely be overweight the field that stack if possible. And if I can't get Lamar, that's okay. I still want a ton of Andrews this year.
Yeah, I'm 100% on board with that. I love Andrews. And the fact that they outlawed the tackle that took him down, it clearly means that he can't get hurt this year, right? Because there's no hip tuck.
Guaranteed.
So. Guaranteed. You heard it here first. Awesome. Before we get you out of here, I've got a handful of these injured players that I kind of want to dig into a little bit. We need some information on. We've got several big name quarterbacks that went down last year. Joe Burrow with that wrist injury. Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins with some Achilles. They're older guys, so obviously that recovery time is going to take a little bit more. I believe both of them tore a different Achilles. One's going to be the planting foot. I don't think Rodgers is his planting foot. But do you have, I guess, where's your risk level on these guys? Do you still think that they can withhold, a top 10, top 12 offense with that skills that they're going to have at this age?
Yeah, so you're correct. It was different legs for each quarterback. Rodgers was the left leg. Kirk Cousins was his right leg. And when you're thinking about functionally those two injuries and how it affects the player, Kirk Cousins will probably feel it a little bit more on like deep passes. So when he drops back to pass, 3-step drop, 5-step drop, whatever, and plants on the right leg and then tries to explode forward, you might see him compensate a little bit more and just try to use more of his arm to accomplish that. That's a very, very small factor when I'm considering like overall risk of these players, but it is one thing that I think is at least interesting to note this year. The other thing is that these players are on a slightly different timeline. Of course, the Aaron Rodgers injury happened on Monday Night Football in week 1, 4 snaps in. So you're talking about a September surgery compared to Kirk Cousins, which happened much later in the year, about 3 months later. So Rodgers is more likely to be at 100% right now and in the season, and Kirk Cousins will take just a little bit longer to get back to 100%. But because these guys are, older in their career, they are your tried and true pocket passers who are going to give you, maybe 5 rushing yards a week if you're lucky. They're not going to give you anything. They're in the pocket, right? So this injury won't really affect them a ton on the field because their Achilles and the injury isn't as necessary to their performance the way it would be for Lamar Jackson, Anthony Richardson, Jane Daniels, like those types of guys. So it's something that I'm tracking and just like making sure everything looks good over the next couple of months. But I haven't really adjusted the way I'm treating them in drafts just because they are those pocket passers.
Love to hear it. Because they both of them have some pieces. Garrett Wilson, Drake London. I think everybody's wanting a good shot at those guys, especially going into the first round, beginning of the second round. Joe
sure.
Burrow, I've seen a handful of reports that like this is an injury that like there's worry whether or not he ever will be at 100% re-injury. How much truth is there to like? Is this just worrying for no reason because it's Joe Burrow and we've seen him hurt before, or should there be a little hesitancy with him?
Yeah, so with his injury, it is a ligament. It's called the scapholunate ligament for my medical people out there. Basically, it's a ligament that connects a couple of bones in your wrist. And this ligament and the bones associated with it too, can have reduced blood supply, which means that the healing time generally takes a little bit longer. So that's kind of the concern that people have thrown out there. And if that doesn't heal appropriately in the first kind of go around, there's a slightly increased risk of developing arthritis over the course of time as you use your hand more and your wrist more and that sort of thing. That, it's something that I'm considering maybe like for the later stages of his career. But everything that I've seen from Joe Burrow so far and all the reports, and shocker, they're always positive this time of year, but they have been very positive on Joe Burrow and where he's at. He's throwing, he was throwing in OTAs, he was throwing in mini camp, he was participating, fully in those situations. So barring a setback over the next, 8 to 12 weeks, which I'm not anticipating, I am assuming Joe Burrow will be good to go week 1 and he'll be, basically functioning as he has in the past. This is something though that you do want to monitor in training camp. Just make sure like as they ramp him up and start to have him throw full velocity, full distance, 4 or 5 days a week, as opposed to just a couple of days of the week, right? As you increase the overall volume of throwing in training camp, you just want to watch out and make sure you're not seeing, soreness in the wrist or Burrow needs a day off or, those sort of things. But otherwise, everything that I've seen so far is that he should be good to go.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of his calf injury last year. It popped up, I think it was like July-ish. And then
Yeah,
again,
late
we
July.
see him like re-injury in August. And it was one of those, like, I pulled back from him a lot. Just like, Andrew Luck fatigue as well. It's like, it's a calf. He's done. It's going to end him, a little over
Yeah.
dramatic on my end. But, it was just one of those, like you said, you got to keep an eye on these injuries, see if they come back. Kyren Williams is one that we're all going to be watching the rest of the summer. We had that little foot scare in OTAs, finished out OTAs okay, but outside of a re-injury, are you going to have full confidence in his just the points per game that you're going to get from the guy, whether or not you get the full 17 slate or not?
So Kyron's super interesting, right? Because I think a lot of people think about him as like he was just a volume play last year, which, I mean, he was. He got a ton of work. He basically had a Christian McCaffrey level workload. I mean, Sean McVay had this dude on punt returns for part of the year, right? Like, that is outlandish in today's NFL. But he was also super efficient. Like, his numbers as far as his broken tackle rate, his explosiveness, all those things were really, really good. So Kyren was a guy that was efficient and had a ton of opportunity. I think, last year he averaged, I think it was just over 21 opportunities per game. I would strongly bet against that for a couple of factors. One is they saw him get injured last year. You saw the high ankle sprain. Now you have an offseason foot injury. And I'm not panicking on the foot, but I'm like, this is another knock to say, like, he probably isn't at the level he was last year from a workload standpoint. And then they draft Blake Corum, and they openly talked about it as like, we want to take a little bit off Kyren. Is that 2 touches a game, 5 touches a game? We don't really know, but like, it's something. So he's not going to get, I don't think, the workload he saw last year. He will probably still be very, very good. So it's one of those conversations of like, does he have the RB1 overall, RB2 overall ceiling that, like, on a weekly basis, you could get that from Kyren last year? I'm not sure I see it this year, just with those kind of workload concerns and the injury history, but I still think he's going to be very, very good. So, like, in best ball formats, when he was previously going, middle to late round 2, I was like, this doesn't feel right. I don't know, man. But now that he's like fallen, sometimes he falls to the back of round 3. It's like, at this point, I'm going to take a shot. So I've been trying to get my exposure now while there has been a little bit of a dip. And I probably will cool back off as he gets closer to like the round 2-3 turn again, probably in August.
Yeah, I've gotten lucky in, I think, 2 drafts now where I was able to get Puka at the end of the first and Kyren at the end of the third. And it's
that's nice.
Not a bad way to start the draft,
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Well, Betz, can I call you? We're close enough now. I can call you Betz, right? And go last name
Absolutely.
basis.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, hey, I don't want to take up too much of your day. I can't thank you enough for being on the show. Before we get you out of here, if you want to plug anything, let the people know where they can find you.
Yeah, man, of course. I'm really happy you asked me to come on. This was great. You can find all my work with the Fantasy Footballers, whether it's the Dynasty podcast, the DFS and betting podcast, or information in the Ultimate Draft Kit, specifically the injury tracker. There's not many updates to it right now at this time of year with, not too much news happening. But as we get into training camp in mid to late July, that thing is updated literally almost daily as we get ready for the start of the season.
Yeah, can't push that enough. It's been my favorite draft guide for the last, I think, 5 years now. Absolutely blast with all the stuff you guys are doing over there. But everybody, I can't thank you enough for listening. We had a great time. I had all the information. I'm going to be watching this back a couple times myself just to really absorb some of these injury updates. But thanks for watching it, and we'll see y'all later.